Good afternoon. I hope you're all fine. First of all, before I begin, I would like to thank UP National Engineering Center and Arlene for inviting me to give this talk. It is not very often that I get to be invited to be of service to my alma mater, and this invitation brought me such delight. In the next 20 or so minutes, I hope to give you basic information about the intellectual property and the intellectual property system. More specifically, I hope to give you enough information about the concept of intellectual property, its forms and its nature, the importance of IP, and the aspects of the notion of IP protection. I hope that you will get enough knowledge from me so that you will be able to describe the IP system and even better to learn more in the future and apply your learning. So what is intellectual property? Let's begin by taking a look of the world around us using this particular diagram that I made. So what I propose is to classify things according to whether they are intangible or tangible and whether they are natural or man-made. First of all, we have physical natural objects from around us. So these are minerals, materials from living things themselves, planets and systems. So that's our physical environment. In the physical environment, we also have natural phenomena which, to use the words of a famous patent examiner and physicist, are available to us for inspection. And then we have our own creations, which are stuff, machines, tools, and ways of doing things. We also have creations that are more designed to please our senses. So these are the arts and literature. Finally, in attempting to understand how our universe works, we have theories and ideas and algorithms, for example. So, in short, we have natural things and creations of the mind, creations of the human mind, to be exact. Now, this is an important point to make because the World Intellectual Property Organization defines intellectual property as creations of the mind. By this definition, IP is differentiated from the products of physical work. These products are tangible objects such as a house, a bar of soap, an automobile, a cellular phone. On the other hand, intellectual property is intangible, being creations of the mind. And these are really ideas or concepts that are used to make tangible things. So we can say that intellectual property are used to make tangible things. This point is very important because it is really the idea or concepts that are protected by law, but in order for such protection to be effective, these ideas or concepts must be in tangible embodiment or expression. So, for example, in the case of an invention, there is some technology or application of scientific principles in a bar of soap or a cell phone. So, what is protected is the set of ideas that are used to create the soap or cell phone and not the embodiment of which is the soap or cell phone itself. There are three broad classes of intellectual property rights. Uh, these are the rights that are legally defined, and we say that IPR are statutory defined intellectual property. And the first of these are the inventions, and then we have the literary and the artistic works, and then the so-called marks or images used in commerce. This can also be categorized into two: industrial property, which includes inventions, trademarks, industrial designs, and geographical indications. As you probably notice, the industrial properties are those that are of functional nature. And on the other hand, the artistic works belong to copyright. Now let's go into the different forms of intellectual property rights. The first one of these is the patent. And the patent is an exclusive right granted for an invention. Now we have to define what invention means so that we are clear on what is protected by a patent. An invention is really a technical solution to a given problem. So, for example, if the solution is if the problem is cleaning and whitening the skin, then the solution is a soap which does that. And the solution usually is a combination of one or more ideas. So, in the case of the skin whitening soap, it combines the properties of ordinary soap with the enzymatic action of papaya extract together with the soap. And this combination provides the technical effect which solves the problem of skin whitening. Another intellectual property is industrial design. Like patents, industrial designs focus on protecting particular products. But in the case of industrial design, the focus of protection is not function, but the ornamental or aesthetic aspect of the product. So these are combinations of certain features. So this may be three-dimensional features such as shape or surface or texture, or two-dimensional features such as combinations of patterns, lines, or color. So on the right you can see a sitting place at a hotel in Cebu which show beautiful curves and a textured surface that is really appealing to the eye. It has function, but what is protected in this case is the aesthetic aspect of this sitting place. Below that picture is a picture of a page on a patent, a US patent. And this is a patent on the design of the Coca-Cola bottle. Uh, as you can see, uh, the design is, is composed of curves and fluted surface of the bottle. This is also an example of an industrial design. A third type of intellectual property is the mark, which is also known as a trademark or a service mark. In the examples that I show here, these are composed of letters or words, shapes, color, lines, and other geometrical elements. The basic idea of a mark is to distinguish the goods or services of one enterprise from another. And this also works true for universities. So for example, Mapua has its own logo, and this logo is associated with a certain uh, type of graduates, usually engineers, and associated with them are certain characteristics of certain professionals. And that is the way that a trademark works. A paper which is included in the references of this presentation even discusses that the way that trademark works, uh, human beings tend to look at trademarks as if they are faces. So when you see someone, you recall the attributes of this person. And it is also true with trademarks. For some, for example, some fast foods, when you see the color of their tumbler or even just the logo, you begin to imagine the taste of the product uh, that they provide. Similar to trademarks are geographical indications. And geographical indications also connect products to something. In this case, the products are connected to a specific geographical origin. Uh, what is really connected are the reputation and characteristics of the product to its source. So, for example, in the case of this indication here, this indication is attached to packages of a certain type of tea that comes from a region in Sri Lanka called Darjeeling. So, this geographical indication ties up the tea to the region of Darjeeling. The last type of industrial property which I am discussing today is the trade secret. And by its name, it is really about confidential information. It's not just confidential, any confidential information. It's information that gives the rights holder, the owner of the information, a commercial advantage over competitors. So one big example of this is my favorite example, which is the secret recipe of KFC for its chicken and gravy and sauce. The last type of intellectual property that I will mention today is the copyright. And the examples of this, so you get an idea of what copyright is about, includes a wide variety of works such as books, paintings, music, sculpture, even computer programs, and technical drawings as well. So these are copyrightable works. Copyright and the other types of industrial property rights are different from each other in that in the case of copyright, what is really protected is the way that the idea is expressed. So the way a book is written, the colors in a painting, that is the expression of the idea, and that is what copyright protects. In the case of patents, it is the idea itself which is protected and not the embodiment of the idea. This is one big difference between IPR, these two kinds of IPR. Now, there are also what we call registrable and non-registrable IP. And a registrable IP requires application for registration so that it can be protected. A non-registrable intellectual property does not need that. Once registered or once registration is applied for, a registrable IP undergoes examination. This is not true in the case of non-registrable IP. And examination implies the presence of such things as registrability criteria, which is also absent in the case of non-registrable IPs. So as you might guess, the registrable IPs are inventions, industrial designs, and marks. And the non-registrable IPs are the trade secrets and copyrights. More about the nature of intellectual property rights. They are territorial because they are protected only where they are registered. So if you protect it in one country, the national laws of that country protect that intellectual property. But on the other hand, the market for intellectual property is global and without borders. So, uh, because protection is only national, to really protect it wherever it is marketed, it should be registered in those areas too. Also, intellectual property right is an exclusive right. And what this means is that non-holders of the rights are not allowed to use the intellectual property. In this sense, an intellectual property right is a negative right. It excludes non-holders from using the intellectual property right. And we will talk a little bit more about using IP later. Now, of course, this exclusive right does not mean that it cannot be shared with other people. So, for example, through such mechanisms as licensing, the exclusive right can be uh, used by non-holders of the rights for a temporary time. IPRs are also assignable. That is to say that ownership can be transferred through certain steps such as licensing, sale, or assignment to some entity. Intellectual property are also independent and not interchangeable, which means that an object may embody uh, several intellectual property rights at the same time. So, for example, we go back to the Coke bottle that I showed earlier. Uh, the Coke bottle was first registered for a patent in the 1920s. So, its protection is for a receptacle, a container of the Coca-Cola drink. But later on, the Coca-Cola company also used the bottle as a distinguishing uh, packaging for its product. And in this manner, it served as a trademark for the drink. And so later on, they also um, registered a trademark using the bottle. Now, so you see, uh, the bottle was protected by a patent, and to this day remains protected uh, as a trademark. But they are not interchangeable. The patent protects the function, the technology of containing the drink, but on the other hand, the trademark protects the idea that this drink is associated with the company Coca-Cola. Of course, like many rights that are defined by law, IPRs are subject to public policy, and usually public policy is concerned about balancing the reward of creators with the welfare of consumers who use the intellectual property. Uh, Intellectual property is also divisible, but even if it is divisible, it does not diminish in value. And what this means is that you can divide ownership into creators and right holders. You can also divide the marketing of the IP in different territories. And you can use different ways of commercializing it, as I mentioned, through licensing, sale, and assignment. What's the importance of intellectual property? To understand the importance of intellectual property, it may be a good idea to look at the way the global economy has transformed over the years. So, the global economy was initially agricultural. In the pre-industrial world economy, the main source of wealth was agriculture, which is a labor-intensive activity. Then the economy became industrial, and the source of wealth is now manufacturing. Now, manufacturing required such inputs as labor and capital. Later, in the middle 1900s, the industrial economy gave way to the post-industrial economy, where goods were mass produced. But even in the transition to this new economy, labor and capital were still important inputs. Now we have the knowledge-based economy, in which knowledge and knowledge workers are more important than the physical inputs such as labor and capital. So, the basis of the knowledge economy are knowledge-intensive activities such as research and development, creation of companies around technologies, and similar activities. The knowledge economy is also characterized by the rapid progress of science and technology, and of course also the obsolescence of technology itself. But the greatest feature of the new uh, world economy is that it is reliant on intellectual capabilities rather than physical inputs or resources. In fact, such intellectual capabilities are now more important than inputs such as land, office, physical infrastructure, and the like. In the knowledge economy, the IP system also serves to regulate access to knowledge and to balance the interests of creators with the welfare of consumers, as I mentioned earlier. And hence, in the knowledge economy, uh, IP has become its currency. There are many advantages to the IP system, and some of these can be discerned by looking at some examples from IP-based IP-based businesses from created at Mapua University. So, for example, we had a group of students who built a vending machine that sold cooked noodles, and they built this using their own money. They were able to recover the cost of their work when they sold the technology to Nissin Monde, a Japanese company. The cell phone for the blind was also built by a group of undergraduate students, and it was a source of value, not only cash value, but also prestige for the students and for the university. Later on, an investment of 1 million pesos was provided the students to create their own spin-off company or startup company that would bring the cell phone for the blind to the market. Asher is a recent spin-off company by a by the dean of the School of Civil Engineering in Mapua, who created together with uh, collaborators a device for measuring and monitoring the structural health of buildings before and after an earthquake. And he created a company which now sells the device. So not only is the company able to start recovering the cost of their research, it is also a source of value other than cash because it also created employment. And at its initial stage, it received investment from government. More recently, we have a flexible light capturing film which won the Dyson uh, award in sustainability. Now, this new technology uh, stands to gain investment from all over private and public sector, and because it is a rather innovative creation, it probably has a strong market position when it comes to the market. Now, of course, if intellectual property is so important, then it is only necessary that it should be protected. In the Philippines, the protection is extended to inventions, marks, trade secrets, and copyright. Now, inventions and marks are registrable intellectual property, so they have to be applied for at the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines. In the case of inventions, there are two kinds of protection. We have the patent, which is protected for 17 years from the date of filing, and the utility model, which is a kind of small patent protected over 7 years. And the term of protection is non-renewable, which means that after 17 years for the patent or 7 for the utility model, the invention becomes part of public domain. On the other hand, marks which are registrable also at IPO field are protected for 10 years, after which they have to be uh, renewed. And once renewed, they can be protected again for another 10 years. And it can be, and marks can be renewed indefinitely. Trade secret, on the other hand, are not registered at IPO field. Now, for the simple reason that if a trade secret is registered, then it has to be disclosed, and therefore the advantage that is provided to the business by the secret is also lost. In this case, the protection is indefinite, meaning that the trade secret is protected as long as it is kept a secret. Copyrights are also not protected, but in the case of copyrights, they are automatically protected upon fixation. Now, what this means is uh, once the work is put on some media, then copyright is already applicable to the work. So an example of a medium is paper. So once you put down something on paper, whether it is a letter, a book, the lyrics of a song, it is already copyrighted. And you don't need to register it at any office for the copyright to be applicable. So the length of the copyright protection is the lifetime of the author or the last surviving author if it's a group of authors that created the work, plus 50 years after the death of the author or the last surviving member of the group of authors. So that's intellectual property protection. Now, what does it mean? What IP protection means is twofold. First, it is legally permitting a kind of monopoly in the practice of an invention or creation. And I will define practice a little bit later. And the other one, of course, we have seen earlier is guaranteeing a negative right. Now, when we say practice of an invention or creation, what we really mean is manufacturing, using, copying, or selling an intellectual property in the context of commercial gain. So, if an intellectual property, in short, is used in some commercial activity, then we say that it is being practiced. And the only person who can practice an intellectual property is the owner of the intellectual property or the people to whom rights to the intellectual property were granted. It is a negative right because in effect it excludes non-holders of the right from practicing the IP without permission or license from the owner or holder of the IP. So what this means is that for any non-holder to be able to use the IP, this non-holder should secure permission or license from the owner. Now, what does it entail to get IP protected? What it requires is full disclosure of the intellectual property before government. So in return for government protection, everything about the intellectual property has to be disclosed to government. And this is the reason why trade secrets cannot be registered. So, in the case of inventions in particular, this means providing enabling disclosure, sufficient enabling disclosure. And what this means is you provide enough detail so that a person who is skilled in the same field as the invention can actually reproduce the invention for inspection, or as it is said in the patent law, to carry out the invention. So, that is all that I can discuss within the 20 minutes that have been allotted to me. I hope you remembered uh, some points in my discussion, and here are some points that I hope you remembered, five or more. Okay, I actually produced only four, and it is up to you to supply the rest of the items that you remembered. Thank you very much.